This is the second session about evolution. The next one will be two unrelated topics, DNA and how it resembles software. DNA is the software of life. Sharon will probably help with that. And Einstein's theories of relativity, special and general. And the last one is going to be on quantum physics. We've covered all the sciences, haven't we? Or at least a pretty long tour through the sciences. All right, let's get started. I will start the recording on my end. And we'll have two recordings just in case. Christianity and the History of Science, session meeting number 8. Our topics for tonight, we are again in chapters 5 and 10 of the textbook, insofar as we're in the textbook at all. And the topic for tonight is evolution again, and a biblical response to it, including the stuff that's not in the textbook, but you would make me do it in the questions session if I didn't do it in the formal part of the talk. And just to prepare you for what's coming tonight, there are not as many slides. We're going to be going more slowly through the material tonight. And I am not going to be telling you what to think. I'm going to be mapping out things you need to know about and possibilities you need to be considering to form an informed opinion. Bearing in mind that science and the response of theology to science is a growing, changing thing, and there is not a cut and dried answer that I can give you where I can say just believe this simple thing and ignore the rest. Reality, that's not how God made the universe. Reality is not like that. Well, let's review what it is that Darwin gave us with his theory of evolution in 1859. Now, as I just said, I'm only going to be mapping out topics that need to be studied at length. This is going to be a roadmap, not an exhaustive coverage of the subject. Parts of it are going to be remarkably brief and incomplete, but you'll know there's something there you need to think about and learn about. The big thing Darwin gave us is a concept of a new kind of mechanism, a new way things can work. The environment doesn't cause the organism to adapt. The environment selects and rewards the ones that have randomly changed in the right way. That's the key concept of random variation and natural selection. Random, at least in the sense, not in the sense of uncaused, but in the sense of unrelated to the goal. Variation caused by things unrelated to the goal. The results that are closer to the goal get selected and rewarded. Except I say goal, and there isn't really such a thing in evolution. The ones that survive better get selected and rewarded. Sir Karl Popper described this as backward causation. It's a relation between cause and effect other than the usual one. The environment selects rather than making things. Now, in the other sciences and in popular culture, Darwin gave a lot of people confidence that life could be explained mechanistically without God. It was a big step toward making life less mysterious and spooky. It led atheistically inclined people in particular to want to tell more of the story than is known. This afflicts popular accounts of evolution, and you will hear biologists and anthropologists complain about it as much as you will hear biblical scholars complain about it. What's handed out to the public on a popular level, particularly 50 years ago, tells more of the story than is known. Wants to give the idea that there is a simple, well-known, well-understood explanation for the development of life from before its origin up to us, and there's no puzzles or anything like that. It's all cut and dried. You can put your faith in it. You don't need anything else. For many people, that sort of view of what you are and what kind of universe you're in becomes a substitute for religion. And I think that is the reason Christians are often so put off by evolution. They've heard it presented to them not as science, but as a sort of popular metaphysical thing you're supposed to believe that explains your meaning and purpose and place in the universe, and you don't need anything else. So I hope Sharon did a good job last time of showing you a bit of what evolution looks like to a scientist, complete with cartoons and funny characters. Now, what are the remaining weak spots in evolutionary biology? Some people will get excited at this point and say, oh, he's going to show us why we can ignore the whole thing. No, I'm not going to do that, but it has weak spots. Things have been questioned. Some cautionary notes to my fellow Christians. Don't swallow bad science in the hope that it will solve all your problems. Some people, some Christians, find a book written in the 1960s trying to refute the evolutionary theory of the 1920s and swallow everything in it and learn no more and think no more. I don't think that's the right approach. Don't expect anybody to knock down huge amounts of scientific evidence with one smug move. I'm not going to give you 3 or 4 sentences that disprove it all and make it where you can ignore it all now. I have been personally requested to do that several times in recent years. Not a job I'm going to take. And the third note here is let science progress. Remember, 150 years ago, scientists were quite confident that as far as they could tell, the universe was infinitely old. There's no sign of anything like creation ever having happened. I should say a full 200 years ago. And it wasn't until the mid-20th century that astrophysics gave us the Big Bang Theory, the increasing evidence that the universe has a finite age. Hasn't been there all along. And if Christians had wiped out astronomy 200 years ago, we would have never known that. Or if Christians had even shunned astronomy, told each other to avoid it. Okay, one of the well-known types of weakness or difficulty, notice I did not say disproof, but weakness or difficulty or challenge in evolutionary biology is called the problem of irreducible complexity. The idea is there seem to be some evolutionary steps that are not possible, could not have been made, because they involve building an elaborate thing that has survival value when you have the whole thing, but when you have only part of it, it has negative survival value. Very simple example that's probably not actually a good example of this, but will give you an idea what kind of thing it's about. Consider wings. If you have wings that you can fly with, that gives you survival value, right? What if you're halfway from evolving from wingless to winged, and you have sort of half wings that you can't fly with, but you have to grow them and carry them around with you? You don't have arms anymore or forepaws, you have half-developed wings. That would have negative survival value. There's no reason small variations in it would increase your survival value. There's no reason the small variations that got you from paws to half-developed wings would increase your survival value. And evolution only works if every little change without exception increases survival value. Otherwise, nature will select against it and it won't continue. A better example is the vertebrate eye. Obviously, you have eyes that you can see with. They're very useful. But think how complicated an eye is. And think how you would get from a primitive organism with no eye to an organism with an eye. What would the intermediate steps be? What could there be that has some survival value at every step that gets you along the way from no eyes to eyes? Remembering that every little step has to increase survival value or it won't be preserved. So this is called the problem of irreducible complexity. And it's a problem that was noticed already by Darwin. There are piecemeal answers to it in individual cases. It's hard to say at this point whether there are going to be good answers to all of them. I just don't know. I'm here only to map things out. There is a scientist named Michael Behe who has made much of this and uses this as a key argument for what is called intelligent design. That is the idea that God as designer has somehow programmed the development of life. It's not all random variation and natural selection. Okay, a second big puzzle, and one that Sharon mentioned last time, is the origin of life, abiogenesis. That is, how do you get life from non-living things? How did it start? Evolutionary theory doesn't work unless you have living things that have reproduction and heredity. What if all you have is minerals? Okay, what is known about the origin of life? Basically nothing. There are speculations and guesses. There is, as far as I know, very little confirmed knowledge, if any. And then you have also the origin of the universe and why there is such a thing as physics and chemistry and so forth. Where do you get any of this? Evolutionary theory doesn't give you an unbroken path from non-existence to the current state of the world. It doesn't do that. It only describes the development and diversification of life, given that life already exists and has reproduction and heredity. Now, this is something I am far from expert in, but this is something where what you learn in popular books is very different from what you learn in, for instance, an anthropology course. Human evolution, there is surprisingly little evidence about the last steps between the great apes and us. There used to be, particularly back at mid-century, books that had a dramatic picture. You must have seen the picture of a little chimp-like thing, then a taller ape, then another, then another, then another, then another, and finally a human being. My anthropology professor said, that is bunk. Throw them on the page in random positions and it's more like what little evidence we have. Many of the things that are considered to be or thought to be ancestors of human beings are known only from partial fossils, one fossil per species or something, not much or very little fossil remains. So there's a gap in knowledge there. In particular, there's also a time problem. The appearance of human thought and language, from what little we can tell, seems to have been extremely sudden compared to most of evolution. Remember, evolution is supposed to take tens of millions of years to do anything substantial. The appearance of human thought and language seems to have taken 100,000, maybe less. Not an evolutionary time scale, and nobody seems to know why. I mean, there are people hypothesizing about it. I wish them well. They may discover something. But right now, there's a lot of mystery. Notice that I'm not going to say that nothing is going to be discovered to make this clearer, but I am saying that right now, it's easy to run into people telling more of the story than is known. Now, there is a mathematical objection that has been pointed out by the Yale mathematician David Gelernter, who was also a Unabomber victim. He's in the Department of Computer Science at Yale University, unless he's retired by now. His objection could be summed up simply as, 1 billion years are not really enough time to build something with 1 billion parts when you're doing it by random variation and natural selection. Billions are not the actual numbers here. It's more than 1 billion years and more than 1 billion parts. But the point is, evolution doesn't know where it's going. Evolution is not a guided process. It's haphazard variation and natural selection. It can only work very slowly. And Darwin had no idea how much time it might have needed or how much time it might have had. We're getting to where we know more about those things than we used to. Let's think a little about this. Could evolution actually do, in the time available, all that it's supposed to have done with nothing but random variation making it work? I don't know. I can only tell you that this is an issue raised by an eminent mathematician who is not the only person raising the objection. There are a number of them. Gelernter is Jewish and is not connected with Christian creationists in any way, which I think makes his argument all the more convincing. He would be content with a quite atheistic explanation, and he hasn't found one. His point is simply there is still a deep mystery in evolution. It's not a fully explained thing. But in a healthy area of science, that's how it should be. Just what I said, we should expect a living area of science to have weak spots. The complete answer didn't pop out of Darwin's head in 1859, only an important key concept and some evidence backing it up. And the best Christian response, I think, is to let science keep progressing while being cautious about bad science or pseudoscience or eagerness to tell more of the story than is known or confidently theorized. In other words, let's not let science turn into dogma when it's actually active research. All right, how do we make a biblical response to all of this? Bear in mind, I'm still in mapping out mode. I'm not going to give you the answers. I'm only going to name some things to think about and think through. This part of this talk, this course, is not in the textbook by Piercy and Thaxton, but if I don't include this, you'll make me do it all in the question session. So I'll do it in a more orderly fashion now. As I said, I'm not going to tell you what to think. I'm going to map out the main possibilities. First thing I want to share with you is a few thoughts, a few notes on how to read the book of Genesis. Number one, what came to mind the first time Genesis 1 was read to you in kindergarten is not the complete reading, is not the whole thing. Look back at it as an adult. I know it's the first passage in the Bible I can remember anybody ever reading to me. The kindergarten teacher in Moultrie, Georgia, in the fall of 1962, it must have been. And it was very vivid, and I think it's a very important passage of the Bible. But the point is, don't just think back to your kindergarten memories. Actually look at what it says. Second, if Genesis 1 makes you think of a globe in space, then you're being anachronistic. I mean, that probably is the right thing to think of, but know that the original audience of Genesis would not have thought about the earth as a globe in space. They would have thought of all this as describing how things look from on the ground. They couldn't think of being anywhere other than on the ground, right? That's where you are. And a lot of the descriptions in Genesis make more sense when you keep that in mind. And the third thing, this is really important, and I'm sure Deb knows more about it than I do. Genesis 1 is written partly to rebut the view of creation that people might have had if they didn't hear it. Other religions think of the earth or the universe somehow giving birth to things. The universe gives birth to the earth, Mother Earth gives birth to the things on it, or something like that, through a natural process. The Bible describes God as more like an architect or craftsman who's chosen to build something, not give birth to it. And God is described as father, not mother, for a very important reason that's totally off our radar. And that is, God is not the womb, the physical environment in which this embryonic universe grows. Pagans wanted to think of something like that, and the God of Israel is not that. So this is not about superiority of males, it's about God not having a womb, God not giving birth to the universe. And that's an idea that's totally off our radar by now, but needs to be remembered. Okay, I think we agree the Bible teaches unequivocally that God created the world, including all living things. So at most, evolution can be part of how he did it. It's not the alternative to God. In that sense, we are all creationists. Now, we have to determine whether the Bible teaches that the earth is young or old. If the Bible teaches authoritatively that the earth is much younger than evolutionary theory supposes, then we have to believe that. By the way, if you take the young earth option, here is a way to save a lot of trouble. Don't try to deny that natural selection is a real process. Just conclude that it hasn't had time to do anything appreciable. But of course, nature is favoring some organisms and not others, and they are mutating. You don't have to deny that, even if you believe that the earth is not old enough for that process to have done enough to produce a visible diversification of life. Okay, so I see people going to great length in the name of Christ trying to get rid of natural selection. There almost cannot not be natural selection. Living things vary, and some of them do better in their environment than others. The question is how much of the present nature of life is explained by that. And if you're a young earther, I think you have to believe that it's not. That is just something that, well, if we last a few billion more years, it would do things, but right now it has very little effect. Now, here's a crucial thing. The Bible does not give the age of the earth as a number. Jesus or St. Paul doesn't say 4,000 years ago when the earth was created or anything like that. The age of the earth is deduced from Old Testament genealogies by assuming that they are complete and that no time passed that they don't account for. So if we had a Bible verse that actually gave the age of the earth, we'd be in a different boat than we're in. By the way, I'm sure you all know this, but it's something we sometimes need to point out to new Christians and skeptics. There are plenty of printed Bibles that have a date on every page. There was an edition back in the mid-20th century that did that. King James Version has, I don't remember what it's called, but it has the date or putative date at the beginning of every page. And for the most part, these are solid, but Genesis 1 says 4004 BC. And I've had people point to that and say, see, the Bible says it was created in 4004 BC. No, Archbishop James Ussher in the 1600s said that that was the date you get for that passage if you add up all the generations. In the absence of other information, like 500 years ago when there was no geology, adding up the years in the Bible is the best you could do. And you do get a date that is older than any other recorded history. So it seems okay. It's older than the Egyptians and so forth. But now we have more information, geology, astronomy, and so forth, about how old the earth appears to be and how old the universe appears to be. By the way, I need to point out also concerning the young earth position that it is especially popular with the Seventh-day Adventists, who have a writer named George M. Price, and is promoted by various writers and organizations today. There are people who make careers out of promoting the young earth view. The Adventists, by the way, have other beliefs that we do not accept, such as that their founder was a prophet. So approach this with caution. Many King James Bibles, as I said, reprint Ussher's chronology, which has 4004 BC on Genesis 1. Even back in his time, other people got different numbers. It's just his is somehow the one that stuck. Historically, among Christians, there has been no agreement about how old the Bible says the earth is, if the Bible says how old the earth is at all. St. Augustine, around 400 AD, says the creation is obviously not like any event we've ever seen, And the time scale of it is not ordinary time. It's just a description of what God did and how the work was organized. And it doesn't really give us the age. He could have done it instantly as far as Augustine is concerned. So as the creation is obviously not like any event we've ever seen, and the time scale of it is not ordinary time. That the Bible just doesn't tell us how many years it took. It might have been something God did practically instantaneously. The Bible tells us how the work was organized, or at least organizes it so it can name all the parts of it and tell us. To a remarkable extent, young earth creationism as a doctrine, not just as a guess, is a 20th century and even post-1970 development. It's not something everybody agreed on all along. Now, I will tell you my opinion here. My opinion is that the Bible does not clearly teach that the earth is young. I think if it did, we would have heard a clear consensus about that before the 20th century. Beware of people who find something in the Bible that nobody ever found there before. But this is my opinion. You have to weigh the evidence and the reasoning. You get to make up your own mind. As far as I know, the age of the earth is not in the ECO essential tenets, is it? The statements of our denomination.
I think intentionally, probably.
Right, right. So what are the possible positions you could adopt? If you believe in young earth creation, you have two possibilities, with or without the appearance of age. I'll explain what that means in just a moment. And if you believe the earth is old, then you have to decide how much divine guidance and intervention were involved. Did evolution work at all, or was God manipulating it the whole way along, and so forth? Or there are people who think God just started it under the right initial conditions and it ran mechanically to produce us. That's a little bit too Victorian atheistic for me, but let's consider an appealing position that I did not adopt, and I'll explain why I don't think it's quite as appealing as it looks, but definitely, okay, this is a less appealing one first. Young earth creation without the appearance of age. A person who believes in young earth creation without the appearance of age maintains that there is no real scientific evidence that the earth is old, that all the apparent evidence, the carbon dating and so forth, have been misinterpreted, misunderstood, and if it were all examined and understood correctly, you'd see the earth is only a little more than 6,000 years old. I wonder whether they also believe the whole universe is that young or not. This view has to dispose of a huge amount of scientific evidence somehow. You have to do alternative interpretation of a vast amount of scientific evidence, and I've never seen anyone make more than a brief start at trying to do it. They usually just get bogged down right away. I've also seen a lot of bad science and even bad logic, like time was expanded by a huge factor. Well, wait a minute, are we talking about time or not? Do you mean 4004 BC, or do you mean that in dog years or something? You see the difficulties. Fortunately, there is another young earth point of view. The other young earth position is the earth is young, but looks old because God made it look old. Why would God do that? Well, he wanted to create on earth a universe with stable laws of nature in a physically stable state. Not perfect thermodynamic equilibrium, but stable enough that the earth, for instance, would be without cataclysmic changes for some tens of thousands of years, maybe. And so that the idea here is God built it with stable laws of nature and made it look as if those laws had been operating for a really long time. Let me give you two examples of what that might be like. Suppose God miraculously created a man, maybe Adam, with a physically 25-year-old body. Well, in order to exist, Adam has to have a body that's at some state of physical maturity, right? He has to be young or middle-aged or something. And so, in that sense, God would have to make him with an appearance of age, even though he's not old. Or imagine God miraculously creating a normal, mature oak tree in my yard. One day I go out there and it's there. It wasn't there the previous day. Well, it has all the things a mature oak tree has that would normally have taken many, many years to develop. Or here's another more technical scientific example. Suppose God suddenly created a planet in a stable orbit. And we found it and measured the orbit, but we did not know it was newly created. Then knowing that orbit, we would blithely calculate where it was 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, and we wouldn't know it had actually just been put there. It was stable. It looked like it had been there all along. Okay. It seems that young Earth creation with the appearance of age solves the problem. The Bible can be interpreted the traditional way, and you don't have to get rid of any scientific evidence. You just say the scientific evidence is of the appearance of age that God created, and it does reveal what the laws of nature are and should be studied. We just don't believe things are really as old as they look. That sounds very appealing, doesn't it? It sounds like it's solved all your problems. I have a problem with it. Does it solve the problem? What about physical evidence of specific events? The universe contains, like fossils that record the life and death of specific individual animals, some of which are of kinds that no longer exist, volcano eruptions in the remote past, supernova explosions in distant galaxies that were millions of years ago. These are more than just stable laws of nature. These are detailed facts. And they're false facts if you buy the young Earth with appearance of age position, because you have to say then that God has deceived us by planting evidence of things that never happened. It's just as if he created Adam not merely with a 25-year-old body, but with 25 years of false memories. He didn't do that. So is that the character of God? I find that compelling. I don't think young Earth creation with appearance of age solves the problem, but this is for you to keep in mind and make up your own mind about. There's a book called A Biblical Case for an Old Earth by a man named Snoke that is well worth reading, that believes the Bible describes slow creation, and he actually doesn't believe in Darwinian evolution, so he doesn't have an axe to grind on that point. He's not trying to rescue evolution. He's trying to just rescue the physical evidence and look at what the Bible really describes as seen from on the ground, for instance. Now, if you believe the earth is old, or is probably old, I should point out also these questions are not matters of dogma. You can perfectly well say you think one of them is probably right, another one has a chance of being right, and so forth. I personally think that all the available evidence, if you read the Bible and read the book of nature, puts us in the situation of an old earth and an old universe with considerable room for range of opinions about how much of the work was done by Darwinian evolution, how much divine guidance or intervention there might have been, whether there was abrupt, miraculous intervention at particular points, the emergence of humanity might be one of them, what remains unexplained, and so forth. Now, the really big point here is you do not need and should not expect a simple cut and dried answer. Too many Christians that I have encountered in the past are looking for an excuse to say, Science is bunk. I don't have to learn any of this because so-and-so on TV disproved it all. Not going to do that. Too many advocates of science were just asking for this by trying to pass off unproven theoretical speculative science as proof of atheism, trying to claim that science can tell the whole story and there's no mystery left. That's not real science. That's science as seen by people who have never done any. You can be smarter than the leading people on both sides. You can form opinions about what is likely, and you can keep an open mind and keep looking for more evidence and better reasoning. So next time, we have two unrelated topics: DNA, the software of life, and then Einstein's relativity theory, both special and general. Those are indeed separate topics. And then the last time, I'll tell you what I know, which is not a terrible lot, about quantum physics. And then you'll know all of science, right? No. But you will know a lot of the high points of the history of science. Thank you very much for coming.